Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you may be watching this. I'm Jamie Moeller. This is the Grad Connection, and my purpose in bringing this to you is to try to help graduate students do more than just survive. I want you to thrive as a graduate student, no matter where you are. So it seems like Fridays are the days that I'm getting to be able to offer content or record it anyway. So nevertheless, today I'm coming to you. The last video that I presented last week was on building habits, and hopefully you found that useful. I would encourage you again, if you like the content you're seeing, let me know by commenting on the video. Particularly I'd be interested in, if you look at the video on habits, what was your biggest takeaway? I know for me, it was kind of apropos to run across that video right before I got started talking about the discipline. So this week's content is what I've been affectionately calling the discipline. I'd encourage you to go back and look at prior videos if you want to see kind of the genesis of this and so forth. But what I want to do today is kind of give an overview of this. And the key thing that I would recognize about this discipline is, first of all, I'm going to talk today about the daily habit, right? And when I talk about the discipline, I'm talking about focusing on all four areas of life at the same time, right? Making progress, not sacrificing one for the sake of others, but actually setting targets, setting goals, trying to accomplish something pretty much every day in each of the four areas. And those four areas are the physical, the spiritual, the relational, and finally the professional. And so, as I said in prior videos, a lot of times what we do is, people in the work world is probably one or more of those areas. If you don't attend to them, you kind of sacrifice them by default, and you just kind of let things go in areas of your life. You might be succeeding in one of the other four, but whichever ones you're sacrificing, my point is you don't really need to do that. And so what I want to talk about is, how do you live this? You could call it a challenge-based lifestyle. You could call it a habit-based lifestyle. Call it the discipline. You could call it, goal-oriented living. But it's really talking about how do you make progress in all four of these areas of your life at the same time. And I'll say, prior videos I've talked about where it made a biggest impact in my life. Just as a recap, I was strongest in my professional and the spiritual areas of my life. Relationally, I was good with my wife, but my kids and my relationship and my focus there wasn't quite where it needed to be. And certainly my physical was probably the thing that was the worst, and that's the thing that got my attention. So let's talk about these four. So I'm going to talk about how you can make progress in these areas kind of on a daily basis. Then I'll probably at some point, I'll do a subsequent video about like, how do you look at it on a weekly basis? How do you look at it from like a quarterly or a yearly basis, right? Because essentially this is kind of like, if you imagine it as a series of concentric circles or concentric spheres, is first you have to have the daily game down. You have to be doing the daily discipline um, for anything else to work. The rest of it's not going to work if you're not doing just the small things that you need to do every day in each of these four areas. Then the next would be looking at it from a weekly standpoint of, okay, I'm getting these smaller things done every day. What are the bigger, things that I want to get accomplished in one or more four of the areas in a given week? And then you expand out to a quarterly and even, semi-annually, or, twice a year kind of thing, or even an annual thing, depending on how you want to look at it. So let's talk about, and I'm going to break this down. And the key here is what I would challenge you to do, is to look at your life in these four dimensions and say, okay, where am I actually where I want to be? Where are things actually working for me? I'm making progress. I feel like I'm expanding. I feel like I'm growing, and most importantly, I don't feel like I suck. And so so I would encourage you to look at these four areas, right, and kind of analyze yourself as I talk about them. So first would be the physical area. Again, this is the area that I said that I sacrificed the most in my professional life. Basically, from age 20 to I'm almost 50 now, pretty much had ignored it, and started having health issues. And so, what do I mean by physical? So, essentially, the physical dimension, there's basically two things that you need to focus on, in my opinion. One is exercise, everyday exercising. Now, I say every day, but you're going to have to adapt this to your own life. In reality, do I exercise every day? No. I will say I generally exercise Monday through Friday. Sometimes I'll do not only mornings, but I'll also do evenings. I'll add some on there. Typically, Saturday and Sunday, I will not exercise. Sunday, because I just don't have time. Saturday is kind of really my day of rest, because Sunday is not a day of rest for me. And so exercising every day, and so people are like, well, how do you do that? To get these disciplines in, I would just simply say to start, all you have to do is get up 1 hour earlier than what you normally get up and spend 15 minutes on each of these areas. So in the area of the physical, way I would start is I would start by just exercising. And that might be walking on a treadmill. That's kind of where I started. And when I started, I actually had difficulty. Could hardly walk more than about a mile without getting wheezy and winded, and I actually had to kind of walk slow. The key is you need to do something to make yourself sweat. If you're not sweating, you're not working your body. For me, it's work. For me, it's walking, and I'm starting to get weights back into my routine, like weightlifting. Because again, what I would say is cardio, that is walking, will help you burn calories, but it won't necessarily help you shift the dynamic of your body if you have fat in certain areas or whatever. Now, and the older you get, the harder that is, right? The older you get, you have to be a little more cautious. Now, understand, I am not, and I am not a fitness guru. I'm simply trying to relay some of the things that I learn. Ultimately, if you have some health issues, consult with a doctor for sure. I do have a PhD, so I am a doctor. I'm just not the kind that helps anybody. As a joke, I would say that that's typically the joking statement that I say. So I'm not a medical doctor, right? But to some degree, you need to figure out how to move. We are designed as human beings to be movers. We're not designed to be sedentary. And unfortunately, a lot of the careers that a lot of us have, we end up, and particularly right now during this pandemic, many of us are locked in our households and we're not getting the exercise that we typically do. So, as a starting point, simply maybe it's just walking, but figure out the other thing I'd say is it needs to be something that's fun for you. So it's got to be something you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, it's not going to stick. Now, when I say and enjoy, I say tongue in cheek, because it's like there are mornings that I get up and I don't enjoy getting in the treadmill. But the first, as I talked about last week, it's really about, what is that 60-second thing I can do that kind of pushes me into the larger habit. And so in the morning, essentially what it is for me is getting my tennis shoes on and some socks with it, and I sit here in my chair and kind of get my bearings for the first 15 minutes, and then I'm off to exercise, right? Figure out what it is for you. I think a lot of people, this is what they sacrifice. And as I said before, if you get you could be as successful as you want to in all these other areas, but if you get to the age of 40 and you've lost your health, you no longer have your health, what was it worth, right? You're not going to be able to enjoy life at all. So first of all, in the physical dimension is exercise. I would encourage you to take at least start with 10 minutes. If you don't do anything, if there's nothing that you're doing right now, take 10 minutes. Maybe it's going outside, and I live in Indiana, so right now the weather is starting to get nice. Maybe it's getting outside and walking around for a little bit. Just figure out something that you can do. Also, it can help. It will help if you actually can do it with someone else, because again, this buddy up principle can help a lot in kind of helping you keep motivated. And that's also part of why I'm trying to get some of y'all to connect on Facebook. In the grad connection group that I've created, is to try to create some connection, because one of the things I realize it's very hard to do as an individual if you're kind of all off on your own. There's got to be some accountability, and it really helps to have a partner to do this with. So physical dimension, 10 minutes exercise, and then 5 minutes, I would say, and you can do this a couple different ways. When I started this routine where I learned it, one of the big things that they were advocates of are green smoothies. And maybe I can have a video to talk about green smoothies. And there was a period of time that I lived religiously by green smoothies, but generally speaking, I eat pretty well in the first place as far as health wise, right? Probably my biggest downfall would be red meat, but I don't drink a lot of pop. I don't soda, whichever you want to call it. I don't eat a lot of sugar. I'm not a candy person. I'm really not a dessert person. So for me, the green smoothies, there's a lot of benefits to it. I would encourage you to do some research on it. And if any of you are curious about, concoctions for green smoothies, I can relay that. But I actually started with real physical green smoothies for a period of time, which you basically take spinach, you freeze it, you put it in a magic bowl or whatever little mixer you have, and you could put berries and bananas and there's all kinds of different formulas for green smoothies out there. But essentially the core of it is spinach and trying to figure out different things. And for a period of time, I bought this green powder that I put in with the spinach, and I was doing that religiously for about 6 months. And I didn't notice any major health benefits for it. One of the biggest benefits for most people is, if your system's backed up, if you don't have a routine of expelling waste, Green smoothies will help you do that, and they'll actually start to clean out your system. Now, the caveat to that is, I say, you have to be careful, because if you go overboard on the green smoothies, and particularly overboard on the spinach, you can actually cause yourself some harm as far as your kidneys are concerned. So I'm just going to park that. But to me, the bigger picture is figuring out something to pay attention to your intake. For some people, it might be green smoothies. What I did was I started with green smoothies, but then I morphed over into vitamins, right? And so I take a lot of vitamins. I'm not advocating you should do that. I'm just saying that's where I morphed to. And I found that to be the biggest benefit. So to me, it's green smoothies. To me, it's vitamins, drinking water. Most people do not drink enough water. And so I would encourage you to, maybe that's where you start. So to me, there's two parts to this physical part. Part of it's exercise, and part of it is watching what you intake. In other words, what is it that you're putting into your body? So you could focus on doing green smoothies. You could focus on doing vitamins. If you don't have the money to do either of those two, just drink more water, right? And there are calculations out there for how much water you should take based upon your water, or how much you should drink based upon your body weight. Before I started doing this whole routine, I didn't drink a whole lot of water. So it's about the last 5 or 10 years. I've been drinking water pretty religiously. I probably drink about 64 ounces a day of water, and that seems comfortable for me. Most people are like, "Oh my God, that's crazy." But I'll be honest, when you start drinking water, if you don't drink water a lot, what I will tell you is, the first couple week or whatever, you're going to be spending a lot of time expelling that. But over time, your body starts to get used to it. It starts holding that, and you'll actually start to see that a lot of things work better. So in other words, you'll be more hydrated. Second, going to the bathroom in the mornings, is easier. And I'm just being real with you, right? So there are a lot of health benefits for drinking water. Again, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist. All I can tell you is my experience is that, I morphed from green smoothie as I did vitamins. If you don't have a lot of money and you can't do those two, focus on drinking water. And then the fourth thing I would say is, invert your thinking about what you're doing. And I like this concept of inverted thinking. It actually comes from, and this book may actually do some funky things, but this book right here called Super Thinking, one of the very first principles that it talks about in that book is this concept of inverse thinking, or inverted thinking, by, I think it was a mathematician named Carl Jacobi. And essentially his thought, and I think he was German if memory serves me correctly, but essentially the translation is basically invert, invert, invert is his thought as it relates to problems. Well, go with me here for just a minute. Is instead of, like let's say, and the book uses an example of, let's say you want to make more money. Maybe you want to have more money. Maybe you want to make more money out of the stock market, let's say, or some other thing. Well, one of the things you could do is actually invert that thinking and think about, okay, instead of trying to make more money, what if I just try to stop losing money, right? So what if I lose less money? So, I mean, essentially in your own household budget, this is one of the things is, you can actually, most people are like, well, I don't have enough money. I don't make enough to be able to save. Well, that's not probably true. Instead of trying to make more money to save, maybe you could actually do the inverse, and actually, instead of buying a latte every day, or spending whatever you spend every day that's really not a necessity, it's more of a want than a need, and then saving that. If you take inverted thinking, it gets you out of that mode of thinking, well, I just need to make more money. Well, what if I just lose less? And so, my mantra would be, okay, instead of just trying to be great in an area, just try not to suck, right? So just suck less, and you'll actually see an impact of that. So to this physical thing, there are two things that you can do, regardless of whether you have any money or not, because I know for a lot of graduate students, it's difficult to say, have good nutrition, because I know graduate student budgets are tight. Second, thinking that you could go out and buy vitamins every month may not be a possibility, but there are a couple things you can do. First of all, you can exercise. That's free. You can get out and go walk. You don't have to have the most expensive gym shoes around. Just go move, right? Second, drink more water, right? You should be able to drink more water. That hopefully doesn't cost you a whole lot more to actually take care of that part of your body. Buy a nice bottle, or even reuse plastic bottles, and drink more water during the day. And then the third is quit putting crap in your body. In other words, suck less as it relates to what you put in your mouth, right? Modify that. That is something you can control. You may not have the money to do like green smoothies and all that because I know it gets expensive, but you can also suck less, right? You can do more, but you can also suck less. So, in the physical sense, exercise, right? So, there's basically the energy you expend and how you do it and what you put in your mouth. Exercise 10 minutes a day and figure out a way to increase basically if green smoothies are your thing, you can learn about that. Vitamins, and that's both of those are about nutrition, right? Third would be water, and fourth would be just quit putting crap in your mouth. You don't need to go to fast food all the time. Find something else that is actually more healthy for you if you can. So that's the physical. Okay, that's the physical aspect. So let's move on to the second part, which is spiritual. So the spiritual aspect. Sometimes for academics, you start talking spiritual and they get all freaked out. And, I'm an atheist or whatever their mantra is, and I get that. So I'm not here to try to convince you or convert you to anything, but I will say there is a spiritual dimension to you. There is a heart dimension to you. And regardless of what you believe, there are various ways that you can exercise or you can basically increase the spiritual dimension of yourself. For me, I'm Judeo-Christian. I go to a Christian church. I'm a music leader, praise and worship leader. This is an area that it's always been a part of my life. And so I'm not here to convert you to that. I'm just saying that is an outgrowth of my spirituality. And so generally every day, so they're basically, again, what you want to do is try to spend 15 minutes a day on the spiritual dimension, however you define that, whatever will cause you to grow, whatever will cause you to expand, and whatever will cause you to suck less in your spiritual dimension is what you need to do. All I can do is tell you what I do and give you like options of things that you can do. All right. So for me, on a weekly venture, church and all that kind of stuff, but on a daily, first of all, I basically do spiritual reading every morning, right? I just read YouVersion plans, or sometimes I'll read other spiritual books, and I'll be honest with you, I have not limited my reading to just Christian type of literature or books or whatever. The I got it over there. I'm losing names of stuff, but anyway, I've read lots of different things, right? So I don't limit my reading to only like Christian sources, and I would encourage you to sample a wide range of things. Truth is truth, and there are lots of ways to actually garner truth. There are nuggets that you can get from anywhere, even if everything's not consistent with your particular. And I would say this to someone who's an atheist. Just because you're an atheist doesn't mean that you can't read a Christian source and glean out nuggets of truth from it. So I would encourage you, first of all, is just figuring out some reading, right? But I would say, and so first of all is reading these sources, and I would say not just reading them to go, a lot of people like in the circles I read with their, oh, well, I read a chapter today, or I read an entire book today, or I spent 3 hours reading. Well, my question would be for your 3 hours reading, what do you remember? What struck you, right? What revelation did you get? Most people don't read for revelation. They read to be able to say they read. And they just increase their head knowledge, and they don't find any way to have it integrated in their life anyway. I really don't care what you've read spiritually or otherwise. What I want to see is how it plays out in your life and how you've integrated it into your life and how it's changed your life and how it's changing the life of others. Right? So just reading to say that I've done my duty for the day, I don't care. And that may be harsh for some people watching this, but I'm just telling you the truth. I've been around too many religious people who think they're big shots because they read their book today or they read their chapter today, or they've got this some grand revelation, and revelation is great, don't get me wrong, but you should read for revelation and then figure out how to put it into practice in your life, because ultimately if you read it and you get a revelation and you don't put it into practice in your life, I don't believe it was a revelation. It was just something to puff yourself up on and tell somebody that you suddenly discovered this or whatever. It's just bull. I just don't buy it. And I'm talking as someone who's lived in these environments. So first, reading spiritual material and so when I say spiritual material, it may also be books, books that aren't necessarily religiously spiritual. So the book written by the I should have done some homework here. I apologize, but I'll pull out some if you're curious about some of the books that I'm talking about that are spiritual, that are not necessarily what I would call a spiritual book, that's not necessarily connected to Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or any of those things. I can give you some examples. We can. I probably will do videos diving deeper into some of these things so that you have more context. There's just not enough time. I wanted to try to get this done in an hour as far as a video. So I'm not going to dive into that, but spiritual reading. And you want to read for revelation. That is, simply read until you get to a point that something jumps out of the page at you and just strikes you, right? Strikes a heart chord, right? Strikes a heartstring and makes you do an aha moment of, oh, wow, I've never seen that before. And then stop. Don't read anymore. Just stop right there. And once you get to that point, then mull over that point. And the next step I would tell you is figure out what you can do with it. I would encourage journaling. That would be another, what I would call a spiritual practice. And so I journal every day. And so here is my journal, right? And so I oftentimes will kind of reflect on, and I've just pulled out one here. So this happened to be a Monday. I kind of reflected on what happened that day, or what's on my mind for that day, and then I talk about, what was the thing that struck my heartstring this morning in what I read. I will oftentimes use these journals also when I discover something in a business sense too. So I don't just use my journals for just spirits. It's really about all four areas of my life and progress in all four areas. It's not just limited to spiritual things. So it's kind of like this is a life journal, not just a spiritual journal for me. But I believe that journaling is very important, because essentially a lot of times I don't know what I think until I actually either say it or I write it. And I learned that a long time ago being a professor at Purdue. Is just, a lot of times I wouldn't know what I really knew about a topic or thought about a topic until I was standing in front of people talking about it. And half the time, revelatory statements that I've never made or connections that I've never made in my life would actually come out of my mouth while I was talking. And it just happened, right? And same thing with writing. When I write, when I journal, things will come out of me, that connections that I didn't know were in there, and it helps me get my thoughts out, right? And it's like a reflective piece. So I would encourage, reading a spiritual source, reading for revelation, journaling, and then lastly would be meditation. And there are all kinds of meditation apps, all kinds of approaches to meditation. When I started doing meditation, I wasn't a big believer in meditation. Not in the sense of, the secular sense of meditation, but all meditation does is it gives you space, right? It gives you pause to stop and provides space. And so I found a lot of value in it over the years as I've been doing it, right? So I started with an app called Headspace, right? So, and of course it costs a monthly fee. I'm now using one called Breathe. I know there's one called Calm. I know there's lots of different ones, and you can even go on to YouTube, right? You don't even have to pay for it. You could actually go onto YouTube and probably find meditation music, songs, whatever, somebody speaking to you. So again, it's not an excuse to say, well, I don't have any money, so I can't do this. I don't. That's not acceptable. Most of these resources, most of these things, there are free ways to go about it as you get started, even on a low budget or no budget. So if you say, well, I just don't have the money to do the spiritual aspect of it, well, that's your excuse. That's fine, but that's bull. If you wanted to do it, you'd find a way to do it. So I would encourage you, and just as I'm encouraging 15 minutes on the physical, 15 minutes on the spiritual. And typically what that 15 minutes on the spiritual means for me is like 5 minutes plus or minus reading for revelation with some source, and I vary the sources. It's not always the same source every day. My default is YouVersion, but then it depends on if I'm reading another book at the same time. Basically 5 minutes. So 5 minutes on, 5 minutes on reading for revelation, 5 minutes on journaling, and 5 minutes on meditation. And I don't always do them in the same order. It just depends on what I feel like doing. If you're more of a person who likes repetition, you can do it the same if you want, but I kind of vary it. I think you have to all of these things you have to adapt. I'm explaining how how I integrate them into my life. You got to figure out how they're going to integrate into your life, right? I can't dictate. I don't think I can prescribe for you what will work for you, but I will prescribe and say, if you focus on all four areas every day, you're going to make progress. Right? You're going to see an impact. You are going to expand. You are going to grow, and you're going to suck less in those four areas of life. So that's the spiritual. All right. So spiritual, read for revelation, meditate, journal. Right. Let's move to the fourth area, which is relational. Relational. And in all honesty, the relational, a lot of times, as I've done this over the years, kind of has shrunk from 15 minutes to a little less, and then I use that time elsewhere. So let me talk what I mean about relational is in the daily discipline. What the relational is trying to find a way to connect with at least one or two people, whereby you make a meaningful connection and you make a deposit in their life. And so that could be a note, like write a post-it note or whatever. Well, first of all, let's talk about the who. It could be your significant other, it could be your spouse, it could be your kids, it could be mother, father, brother, uncle, sister, aunt, cousin. It could be a friend, it could be a fellow graduate student, it could be a faculty member or whatever. The message needs to be in the context of who you're communicating, but it's basically making a meaningful human connection with someone, someone important to you. And I just let your heart tell you who you should do each day. Usually mine every day is my wife at least, and then one other person, typically one of my kids. So first of all, that's the who. So you figure out the who, right? I don't know who your who is going to be. But and I would also say don't underestimate the impact that this will make on people. No, let me say that again. Don't underestimate the impact that this will make on people because it can make a huge difference. So that's the who. The what, how. So it could be a note, could be a handwritten note, it could be post-it notes. I mean, if you have little kids, little kids. Now, I didn't start this when my kids were little, but I know of other people that have used this process, this technique, and they have little kids, and a lot of times they'll hide a post-it note somewhere in the house. So you got to be creative with this, right? You got to put a little bit of intellectual thought into this and a little bit of emotional energy. And so there are creative ways to do this. Another would be like cards or messages. You could, for your spouse, you could write something on a mirror somewhere or hide a note somewhere. Could be a text, right? Sending a text. Now, I will say there's also this app that I ran across that's kind of interesting. My son actually told me about it. It's called Love Nudge. And I don't have any stake in it. I'm just saying it's an interesting, but basically Love Nudge between you and your significant other. If you've ever heard of something called the 5 love languages, and at some point I'll probably talk about it because I think there's a lot of value in it. But something called the 5 love languages, which the 5 love languages are quality time, touch, physical touch, acts of service, words of affirmation, and gifts, right? Those are the 5. And so each person that one or more of those resonate with each person differently. So like for me, it's words of affirmation, and acts of service are the things that my wife can do to me that actually have an impact on me. With her, it's gifts, and I think it's words of affirmation, right? So what Love Nudge does is it measures, or you answer a bunch of questions, you answer it, your significant other answers it, and then you kind of know how to meet, the love language, or meet the needs, or sorry, I'm just using the word minister to that person, what registers most with them. I think it's a free, basically it's a free app. I haven't got into it a whole lot, but I've been using it a little bit. It's interesting. But I would say the other thing I would encourage, and I didn't have this in my notes, I would encourage be inventive, be open to figuring out different ways to connect. And if you're an introvert, you're going to connect differently than an extrovert, right? And so you've got to figure all these things out, but putting some energy into this and focusing on it a little bit every day. If you focus on it a little bit every day, you're going to be surprised how much deeper and how much more rich your relationships will be with other people, right? So notes, messages, actions. Now there are a couple ways and I make some notes here. You can basically, the best way to start these notes, and you can put other language around it, but at some point in the note you want to say, I love you because, I admire you because, I honor you because, or I appreciate you because, right? And so you want to that's the core statement, right? The core deposit you want to make is to tell that person. Now, obviously, who you're sending it to is going to dictate which of those phrases you use, right? But use the one that's appropriate and impart into somebody's life. Now, as I said, oftentimes this relational aspect usually doesn't take me all that long. So to me, I spend less time on relational in the daily discipline than I might in the weekly or the quarterly discipline. And because essentially, usually with the relational, I'm trying to figure out ways that I can do things. Maybe it's planning a date night with my wife this week, or figuring out some way to connect with my kids, right? Taking my boys fishing, or those kinds of things. And so, oftentimes, um, the relational discipline, I have a greater impact in when I do the what I would call weekly, because essentially what happens is, this is what I'm describing right now is what you do on a daily basis. Then each week, what you want to create a time where you can actually sit back and reflect on, okay, what progress did I make this week in these areas, and what are some big things that I would like to accomplish in one or more of the four areas this coming week. So maybe I want to plan a date night. Maybe that's the one thing that I want to the one bigger thing that I want to get accomplished. Not just the daily stuff, but one bigger thing I want to get accomplished relative to my relationship. Maybe physical. In addition to the daily discipline, maybe in the physical realm, I want to do 1 extra hour of walking, or 1 extra hour of weightlifting, or go play pickleball with my friends, or whatever it happens to be. Right? It's something over and above what you do on the daily basis. Um, Same thing with spiritual. So in the daily discipline, what I'm doing is, you call it a game too, I suppose. That's what they call it in Wake Up Warrior, which is again where I got all this. Go back to my very first video. You can find the link to that and all the reasons why I'm not referring you. You can go look at that. It's a great thing, and if for a lot of people it works really well. Some people would get offended by it, but again, that's kind of where I'm adapting a lot of this stuff from, and it's the thing that impacted my life, and so I'm wanting to share it, right? And there's a whole lot more to it than what I'm providing here, so it's not like I'm like just repurposing or repackaging or whatever. I just want to see people's lives change in a positive way, like I saw my life change. So um, but anyway, where was I going with all this? So, in the spiritual sense, in the daily discipline, I'm reading. I'm reading for revelation. I'm journaling. I'm meditating, and then the weekly activity is, going to church. For me, it's going to church. It's planning what music I'm going to lead, because I'm the music leader. What new songs am I going to do? What old songs? All that kind of stuff. So that's what I look at a weekly, right? And then there's another superset to this, as I said in the beginning, where you can look at it on a quarterly basis, right? So again, let's just stay on the daily for right now, because if I get too far and too ahead of myself, it may be overwhelming. But so the relational is making an impact, making a meaningful connection, a meaningful deposit in somebody's life that's close to you as far as relationally, right? Again, another thought that I have along these lines is just when you do this is, don't expect anything in return. Do it without any, what I would say, expectation of a response, of a change of behavior. I know a lot of guys who implemented this in their life. Essentially, maybe they had an estranged relationship with their kids or their wife or something, and they start just making this daily deposit. And you may even get an email like, "What the heck is this? We've been fighting the last 3 or 4 months. What are you doing here?" So just keep doing it, and at some point you'll see fruits of that labor. At some point in your life, I promise. So, all right. So that is relational. And then lastly, the last area is in the professional, right? And this is the area that we all mostly focus on, right? But in the professional area, uh, essentially the 15 minutes in the morning that I spend, it's usually reading for discovery, right? Reading something or consuming something for discovery. So something that I've been reading, and this is where the habit came from, but this book, the Coaching Habit, which I talked about in my last video. So that's one that I'm reading. What else do I have down here? I don't have any other. That's the main one that I'm reading right now. But because I keep all my stuff down here next to my desk, so that it's readily accessible to me in the morning. But essentially, finding books and so forth, and I have a whole ton of books that I can refer you to on this. And at some point, if people ask, if you're looking for good business books, good books to consume, at some point I'll probably share some of that, because as I go along, it just naturally comes out. Now, if you've been connected to me on LinkedIn for any time at all, you'll oftentimes know what I'm reading, because LinkedIn is typically when I consume for discovery. It's just like reading for revelation. So I consume for discovery, right? I read for discovery, and once I get that nugget that really just jumps out at me, that is relevant and important to me, I stop reading, and then basically I'll usually write it down in my journal, right? Because if it's impactful enough for me, and the reason that I do that is, the first step of integrating something into your life is first discovering it, reading it, consuming it, finding it out, watching it, whatever. But that's the first step. Then the next step is, to me, I think there's something that happens when you actually read it, you think about it, and you write it. There's something that happens when you write things down. There's something that happens when you write things down that doesn't happen when you type it on a keyboard. It just doesn't, at least not for me. Do what works for you, but I'm just telling you, this is the thing that I've observed in myself, is that something happens when I write it down. And then the third is figuring out, okay, how am I going to integrate that into my life? And a step towards that is sharing it with someone. And so if you've been connected to me on LinkedIn, you can oftentimes tell what I'm reading and what I'm discovering daily, because almost always, about every 2 or 3 days, I'll put it out on LinkedIn. If it's more like relationally oriented or sometimes spiritually oriented, I'll put it on Facebook. Sometimes I'll actually put it in both sources, because it applies to both. But the key is reading for discovery, writing it down if you possibly, if that strikes you, but that's what I do in my journal, and then sharing it with somebody in some mechanism. Sometimes what I read will be impactful enough that it's like I get to work and everybody at work's going to hear about this. Now, understand, we're in the pandemic. I'm talking about pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. But it's still true. I'm sure my wife gets tired of hearing about these revelations, professional revelations. She's like, oh, this again. But essentially, I share it with somebody because it's a way that I can integrate it into my life. And then the last step is, certainly if what you read to discover, and you write it down, and you tell somebody about it, whether that's LinkedIn, Facebook, or face to face with somebody else or some other way, then you have to figure out, okay, how do I put that to practice in my life? That's one of the things I really like about, and it is Stanier. I didn't know how to pronounce his name. Hopefully you've maybe in my other, I don't know, you might have seen, there's some videos that go along with this book. Again, I'd encourage, particularly if you were a leader in an organization or somewhere, and we're all leaders at some level, right? But if you're I have lots of people that I work with and manage and stuff, and so this is about turning your leadership into more of a coaching relationship rather than, and it's got a lot of really good stuff. Anyway, he's got lots of really good videos, and I really like the way he approaches those videos, because he almost in those videos he almost always asks you at the end of the video, okay, what's your biggest takeaway? What can you integrate into, like a challenge, right? Telling you to figure out a way to incorporate into your life. And I think that's brilliant, because what a lot of us do, whether it be spiritually or professionally, when we read and we discover something revelatory, whether it's revelatory in a spiritual sense or revelatory in a professional sense, whether it's discovery in a spiritual sense or discovery in a professional sense, a lot of us just stick it into our brain, and if we don't do something with it, it's gone. Or worse yet, we lord it over people like it's some, like we're more like we become self-important because we have all this head knowledge, and people see our lives and it's like, well, what good's it doing? And I've met lots of people in the business world who are always talking about the latest business book and all that kind of stuff. And some of them even who can consume an entire book in a day or 2 days, and they brag about that. And it's like, okay, that's great that you can read fast, but what the heck did you learn? What do you remember, and what has impacted your life? And 9 times out of 10, you don't see it. Doesn't exist in their life. It's just fodder for them to be able to feed other people and to kind of tout themselves as a speed reader or whatever it happens to be. I'm not impressed by any of that. I want to see what you live. I want to see what you do. I want to see how it impacts your life. If you've had something positively impact your life, I want to know about it. I want to learn about it, because it might help me as well. So, all right. So these are the 4 daily disciplines: the physical, spiritual, the relational, and the professional. And so what I want to encourage you to do is to, number one, the best case scenario is for you to do all 4 of these, right? Start getting up an hour earlier and set a target for yourself of, okay, this is what I'm going to do physically every morning. This is what I'm going to do spiritually. This is what I'm going to do relationally and professionally. 1 hour a day, at least for 5 days a week, at least during the work week, Monday through Friday, right? Take Saturday and Sunday off if you want. Or if you're a go-getter and you're, overkill, you can do 7 days a week, but I'd encourage you to take a day of rest, particularly from the exercise thing, because you can wear your body out, you can wear your mind out, you can wear your spirit out, you can wear other people out through relationships. So I think there is something to be said for rest. And that's a whole nother topic. But nevertheless, these are the 4 disciplines that I would encourage you to do on a daily basis. Now, what I would encourage as a response for you is to, if you're watching this video on YouTube, comment in there and make a commitment. What area are you most weak in? Where do you need to focus most of your effort? You could tell me what things you're actually going to do in these 4 areas. If you happen to be a member of the Facebook group, the private Facebook group, the Grad Connection, put it there. Wherever you're seeing this video content, do something with it. Don't just sit back and watch it and give me a thumbs up or a like or an applause or whatever. How's it impacting your life? What are you going to do with it? Now that you got this knowledge, what are you going to do with it? Don't tell me that you're just going to watch it. No, that's good stuff. And yeah. And I appreciate, positive comments on stuff that I put on there. Don't get me wrong. But if you're not actually doing anything with it, then that's, I don't know that I'm hitting the mark in what I want to do with this content. So I would hope that this would cause you to take action. And I would encourage you that if you want to have a sidebar conversation on this, if whether that's with me or if, again, the reason I created the Facebook group is so grad students could connect with one another, because I think these things are easier to implement in our lives when we do it with others. Harkening back to kind of the habit conversation that I had last week, is figuring out, how can you integrate this? And I encourage you to go back and, if you didn't see that video on habits, I'd encourage you to go back and take a look at it. It's kind of a quick summary of a chapter that I found in the Coaching Habit book by Stanier. So credit to him on that. But it gives you a lot of good material. So what you do with this is your choice, but I would encourage you to enter this journey with me, engage with the content here so that I know what's having an impact on you. Leave a comment or two, connect on LinkedIn, connect on Facebook. Eventually, I will be doing like lives, that is live through Facebook, live through YouTube, and live through LinkedIn, but I'm still kind of waiting. If LinkedIn's what I'm waiting on, is get permission to be able to offer video content live through that, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to do that, but we'll see. Eventually, if I don't get a response from LinkedIn, I'll probably just start doing lives through YouTube and Facebook, and then eventually just link LinkedIn over. So with that, let me say happy Friday to you. We're entering into the weekend. Looks like it's going to be a nice weekend here in Indiana. So wherever you are, I hope it's a nice weekend for you. I would encourage you to stay safe and stay healthy. Again, this is the Grad Connection, where I'm trying to help graduate students do more than survive. I want to see you thrive. So with that, I want to wish you a great weekend, and hopefully this content finds you well, and I hope you find it engaging and useful. So have a great day, great night, great afternoon, whatever the case may be.